to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name's Justin. Episode 66 today. It's our second annual Fantasy Football Award Show. The fantasy football season is over, so on today's episode, I'll be handing out my Fantasy Football Awards, including the Fantasy MVP, Rookie of the Year, Waiver Wire Ad of the Year, and Best Value of the Year. Now, as a reminder, this is my last episode of the 2021 fantasy football season. I'm going to take a little break, and I'll be back in the spring with some top 10 episodes, film reviews, and then some NFL draft prospect videos. I want to thank you all for your support this season. You know, we're a small, homegrown podcast, but I appreciate everyone who subscribed and took the time to listen to some of our advice. Hopefully it helped you at some point this season. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you can be notified when our special off-season episodes drop. Your time is valuable, so let's get to it.
On today's show...
All right, so for today's show, I just wanted to start by congratulating those of you who won your league championships this past week. What a season it was, right? If I told you that players like Rashad Penny, Devin Singletary, Boston Scott, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Elijah Mitchell would be some of your highest scoring fantasy players during your championship matchup this week, you probably would have looked at me silly at the beginning of the season, but that's fantasy football, right? I mean, injuries, COVID, players emerging happen all the time. If there's one thing that we experts know about fantasy football, it's that we know nothing. We make our best guesses based on the information and the data that's made available to us to provide you all with advice, but it's not a perfect science. I want to thank you for trusting me this season. I had some good calls, some not so good calls. That's the way it goes, but it's time to start prepping for next year. All right, it's awards time. I'm going to start with my waiver wire ad of the year. This is the player who you scooped up off the waiver wire and performed well above expectation. And I'm going to go with Detroit Lions rookie wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, this was tough because I think most people would argue that Cordell Patterson should be the winner of this waiver wire ad of the year award. But the reason why I chose Amon-Ra St. Brown over Patterson is because of the end of season production. You look at Cordell Patterson, he was great to begin the season, but really faded down the stretch from weeks 13 through 17. Patterson fell to running back 28 in points. He helped during the season, but he really underperformed down the stretch. Amon-Ra St. Brown, on the other hand, was the wide receiver 2 from weeks 13 through 17, behind only Cooper Kupp. He was a league winner. For those teams that picked up St. Brown before the stretch run, you were rewarded for that. St. Brown sits today with 82 catches, 803 yards, and 5 touchdowns. And the crazy thing is that he's accumulated over half of those stats in just the last 4 weeks of the fantasy football season. I think the Lions have a building block for the future here, and they should be prioritizing St. Brown as a key cog of this pass game for years to come. He'll be a back-end wide receiver, too, in my early rankings for next season. Next, let me go with my best value of the year. So this is the player who far outperformed their average draft position, and I've got to go with San Francisco 49ers wide receiver Deebo Samuel. Samuel was being drafted right around pick 85 overall. He was going as the wide receiver 35 in late August. And as we sit here today after week 17, Samuel is the wide receiver 3. Samuel has 73 receptions, 1,310 receiving yards, 320 rushing yards, and 13 total touchdowns. What a season from the third-year player. Samuel has become a jack-of-all-trades player for Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers. He sees snaps in the slot, out wide, and even in the backfield. He's truly an all-purpose dynamo. He had that third-year breakout for wide receivers we often talk about right after a promising rookie season 2 years ago. He spent the majority of his sophomore season on the shelf, but he stayed fully healthy all season this year and has rewarded those fantasy managers that took the plunge before the season began. At just 25 years old and tied to a young, high-upside quarterback and a good offense, I like Samuel's prospects over the next few seasons, and he should be ranked inside the top 10 for wide receivers for the next few years. Next, I'm going to go with my fantasy rookie of the year, and it's going to be Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver JaMarr Chase. This rookie class is loaded with potential superstar talent. Players like Najee Harris, Kyle Pitts, Jalen Waddle, Javonte Williams have all shown flashes of superstar talent this season and all have performed relatively well. But I had to go with JaMarr Chase here. He's top 5 in receiving yards and touchdowns in the NFL. He just broke the rookie receiving yard for most yards in a season. He also probably won you a championship if you had him this past week when he exploded for 266 yards. Chase is an absolute stud. As we sit here today, Chase has 79 receptions, 1,429 receiving yards, and 13 touchdowns. That's elite. and even more impressive when you remember that Chase is just a rookie. He's tied to his old college quarterback in Joe Burrow, who's taken a giant step forward in his second NFL season. I think the sky's the limit for these two guys. I talked a lot about how I like the Bengals offense this offseason, and I'm going to continue to like them for the next number of years with the collection of young skill players they have. Chase is probably going to be a first-round pick next season and should be ranked in the same range as other wide receivers like Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, and Davante Adams. And then finally, my most valuable player for the 2021 fantasy football season is going to go to LA Rams wide receiver Cooper Kupp. I talked all offseason about how much I liked Cooper Kupp and how he was a wide receiver one in this Rams offense. Well, he's not just the wide receiver one. He is the overall wide receiver one this season and is well on pace to have the best wide receiver season of all time. If you had him this season, it was like having two players worth of scoring from one position. He was like the Christian McCaffrey of wide receivers and offered so much of an advantage over your competition week in and week out. Like I said earlier, I made some good calls this season, and Cooper Kupp was one of my best calls. He's currently the Triple Crown leader at this time for receivers as he leads the NFL in receptions with 138, receiving yards with 1,829, and touchdowns with 15. What a season from the slot god Cooper Kupp, a guy that was routinely being drafted around that wide receiver 17 to 20 range, which was actually after his running mate Bobby Trees. Kupp has been the model of consistency this season and could be in the discussion as a top 5 pick next year, especially in PPR leagues. He's tied to a reliable quarterback and is a key part of this high-powered Rams offense. Even if his draft price is inflated next season, I want Cooper Kupp and will pay up to get him. Cooper Kupp is your 2021 fantasy football MVP. So that'll do it. As a reminder, this will be my last episode for the 2021 fantasy football season. I'm going to take a little break, and I'll be back in the spring with some top 10 episodes, film reviews, and then NFL draft prospect videos. I want to thank you all for your support this season. I really appreciate it. Please remember to comment and like on this video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. This has been the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. It's been fun this season, everybody. See you soon.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.